Welcome, everybody. It is good to be back. And my name is Brad Maddox, and I am the lead pastor here at Crossbridge Community Church. And this is my young friend, Jordan Chitwood, who happens to be the online pastor, and we are glad to be here with Generationally Speaking.
Yes, we are. Tonight is our serious night, second week of the month, second Thursday of the month. We like to slow down a little bit and challenge all of our listeners on Spotify, iTunes, podcasts later down the road, and then also here with us on Facebook Live to break down some deeper themes, both personally and generationally.
Yeah.
And we haven't done too much generational topics tonight, really this year. So we're going to really hit hard on a few generational things tonight.
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, maybe. See what Brad came up with.
I had a hard time
you
processing.
said that you
I
said
had
you're
a hard
struggling.
time processing this. This series, we're going to be talking about our new series called Fact or Friction.
Yes.
And we're going to honestly be talking a lot about friction in different areas.
Yes, friction, tension, confrontation within like our lives, like where the joy meets the tension, stuff like that. And so this is our series. It's 4 weeks long, kicking off this Sunday. Brad's going to kick it off. I'll preach a week. Kim will preach a week, and then you'll wrap it up.
Yeah.
But so that's what we're going to be doing tonight. The 4 areas for this series that we're going to be breaking down a little bit tonight are families, finances, faith, and then relationships. And we're going to be talking about the friction and the tension in
sure
different
about the faith one?
areas. Faith?
Yeah.
It was the 4th one on the...
I thought it was
on the
ourselves.
thing. Oh. Well, it was the 4th one on the thingamabob.
It's all good.
Did you switch it up again?
No.
Okay. Well, it might be ourselves instead of faith.
Yes. Or it could be both of those combined.
Who knows?
Yeah.
We'll find out.
We'll find out.
So
there you go.
Yep. So that's what we're going to be doing tonight.
Yeah, and the thing about friction in all these areas is they affect different people in different ways.
Right.
And I think there's some of these areas, there's a lot of friction in some people's lives, and in other areas there's not. So one of these weeks may hit you harder than others.
Right.
And I think you have to really kind of dive deep in some of this stuff.
Yes.
So.
Yeah. And so the opening question that we want to kick off tonight, and if you are in the chat, let us know in what area of your life.
Craig Wiley says there's friction already.
I know, right? We're already butting heads. In what area of your life do you experience the most friction or tension?
Yeah.
And this answer, please, if you're in the chat, let us know. Type it out. It's going to probably be different for everybody.
Yeah. So families,
Yep.
finances,
Relationships.
marriage,
Yep.
and ourselves. Is there one of those that kind of hit you more than others?
Ourselves. Yeah, easily the one ourselves. And here's why. My answer to this question
This is good because
was...
I'm preaching this one, so I want to hear what yours
Okay.
is. Yeah.
One of the biggest things I struggle with is being a personality perfectionist. And so when I mess up or I make a mistake or I don't do something to the best that I know I can do, I beat myself up like crazy and I dwell on it. And that's actually a big part of my mental health battle, my anxiety, my depression, feeling insecure. One of my least favorite parts is after a sermon is that 5 or 10 minutes after a message, because my brain, it's impossible to shut off of all the things I wish I could do differently.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so the ourselves friction is dwelling on the mistakes that I have made or dwelling on how I'm such a perfectionist in areas and if I haven't lived up to my potential, stuff like that.
Do you think that is partially a self-esteem thing?
Yes, 100%.
Really?
Yeah.
Because you come across as a very confident, yada, yada, yada
Yeah,
individual.
I'm very confident in who I am. But because I am so motivated and I know that I can always reach another level, I get down on myself for not reaching the next level. And so it is self-esteem. It is insecurities of like mistakes that I've made, not so much like how I'm wired.
Yeah.
There was though a lot of time though, like trying to figure out my personality when I came across as aggressive or overly passionate about certain things. There was insecure and self-esteem issues, kind of hating that God made me the way that I was really long time ago, just growing up and struggling with that. Because my personality is often perceived as the bully or the aggressive person, and so each personality has their flaws and areas that they need to mature, and it just took me a while to mature those.
So friction, that's good
Yeah.
stuff. That's good stuff. So what's yours? What?
Craig Wiley says leather pants. No, Michaela says I would probably say myself. Craig Wiley also would say himself.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So it sounds like a lot of people struggle.
with the self-identification type of deal.
Right. And what's interesting is, generationally speaking, that's actually the area that I put down.
Yeah, because I would say my generation probably has less of that.
Right.
I think
I would argue that too.
because I empathize. I mean, I see that in a lot of people your age and what
Yes.
have you. But I guess I don't remember struggling with that as much.
Yes. I would argue that too, mostly because of mental health.
Okay.
I think the myself
It goes back to
and
what we talked about
ourselves.
before when we did the mental health series.
Exactly.
And that's why my generation doesn't understand some of that because we didn't
Exactly.
deal with it as much as what your generation has.
Exactly. A lot of your generation does such a good job of not allowing the noise to suffocate you. The noise, the lies, the etc. Your generation does a very good job of that. My generation dwells on the noise. And that's part of why ourselves, there's so much friction there.
Don't you think some of that is though because you're more aware of the? In my generation, we didn't
That's
know
true. It could be that too.
it. You know,
It could be-
you didn't have 24/7 news. You
Right.
didn't have. I mean,
That's
you know,
true.
if you wanted to see what was going on in the world, you had to sit down at 6:00 every night and listen to Dan Rather.
That's true.
Or Walter. Actually, it was Walter
That's funny.
Cronkite. If you remember Walter Cronkite, please hit me up in the chat and say yes. I am that old also.
I love it. I
But
love
I think that's part of it. Is
I do.
that
I
we
think
were
you're
just
right.
unaware
Awareness.
of
Yeah.
those kind of things.
I think awareness is huge. Awareness exposes what people are feeling and gives it a label, a name
Yeah.
for it,
Yeah.
but it also gives it a platform to be more of that substance.
Yeah.
So, like, especially with mental health, Jay Freimeyer says, yes, I do too. I love it. I'm assuming he was just remembering the person you named earlier.
Walter Cronkite. You don't even know who that is, do you?
No, I don't even remember what you said.
Ryan, do you know
yes.
who Walter Cronkite is? Of course he does.
Ryan says yes. Of course he does.
Yes, yeah, you are an old soul. That's why I can count on you. You're a millennial that gives me hope.
Jay also said that's the way it is, and I assume he's
That's the way.
referring to-
That's how. No, that's how he signed,
Oh, is
signed
that-
off.
was that the sign
Walter
off thing?
Cronkite would
Oh, okay.
always sign off with, and that's
That's
the way
funny.
it is. And that's the way it is.
I love it. I
Yeah.
love it.
So
yeah.
So friction, yeah, and as I was thinking about this in my own life, I think that's interesting. Is it's changed now that I'm older. Like when I think about finances, my finances are different because I'm in a different place now.
Okay.
My friction over finance now is okay. Am I ever going to be able to retire? Or am I going to be working for the rest of my life? Which the answer is probably yes. I will be working for the rest of my life. But
Right.
but it's interesting that as we grow older and what have you,
Oh, for
those
sure.
kind of things change. Now,
sure.
the thing that really hit me was I realized now, which I wish I would have realized earlier, is in the family whole situation.
Okay.
There was a lot of friction, just trying to navigate kids and families and what have you. And of course, we had the disadvantage, which we tried to turn into an advantage of having a blended family.
Right.
You know, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that this Sunday. Is, you know, when we got married, 5 kids, very very young, throwing them all together and trying to make a new family, and all, you know, and then you got, you know, at Christmas time, you got 4 Christmases. Sometimes kids had 5, 6 Christmases, and trying
Right.
to navigate all that. And so there's always friction in that. And I think
Interesting.
that's happening some in your generation now also.
Yeah.
You know, I can think of a couple families even that we're aware of that are dealing with some of those kind of things now, and I think that's a real issue.
Yeah, you hit on something that I thought was interesting, and it actually is a social media post I have going out this Friday. What is something that you know now that you wish you knew then? Because you said I would do a few things differently when it comes to family situation and whatnot. Do you have anything off the top of your head, or is it just some things that?
And I think we've told a lot of our friends that have younger kids and things is that there was a time that you would try to fight every battle.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
and you just couldn't fight. You didn't fight the battles.
Yep.
You know, you got to lose some of the battles and win the war.
Right.
I think we've forced some things on our kids that we probably should not have.
Okay.
And I wish we would have had a lot more conversations. And I think that's one thing your generation is much better at. I watch my kids. I watch, you know, my kids with their kids now, and the conversations they have. I'm going to say this on. I'm going to do my whole sermon here. Well, you know, we said a lot of because I told you so.
Right. Okay. Okay.
And there's times that I wish, as I see my grandkids and things, I'm thinking, you don't need to explain everything. Just tell them what to do.
Right.
You know?
Interesting.
And so I think there's a lot healthier conversations happening.
Okay.
Maybe a little bit too much at times.
Oh, yes. And I think that's part of what we've noticed in our generation is a lot of extremes on both sides.
Right.
Where in some cases yours did nothing or yours did
the
everything.
pendulum has swung too far.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We swung it one way and then. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Jay Freimeyer said, family is a good one. And as you age, your role in the family dynamic changes.
Yes.
And that is something that I know you've had the tension of that struggle of seeing the upcoming generations and that tension of, I don't know how they're going to make it in 20 years from now with how things are going and stuff.
I told Barb we're doomed today.
Right. Right.
We had an interaction with someone at some place, and I just said, "Oh, we're so doomed." And you know what? My guess is and I say that, and I think there's a hint of truth to that. I mean,
Right.
let's just say it is. There's probably some truth to that, but there's also we have a tendency to forget that we were that stupid once, also.
Right.
Or
Right.
that non-caring, or what have you.
Right.
Now, again, you can paint with a big wide brush, and it goes both ways, but yeah. So.
Well, there's just that tension there.
Yes.
And that's what we're talking about is the tension, the friction, and all that. So the next question we want to walk through is some of you might have in your head looked at the area that you have the most friction in. This is a little bit more vulnerable of a question. How do you personally normally respond while you are experiencing friction? Another way of saying it is maybe even confrontation, maybe tension,
Yes.
stuff like that.
And I'm glad you said about that confrontation, because it was hard for me to think, okay, when you think about friction, there's all kinds of people that always grate on you the wrong way.
Right, right.
But we run into confrontation all the time, and how do you handle that? And
Yeah.
my question to you, do you think that's a generational thing, or do you think it's more of a personality thing?
For confrontation?
Yes. And friction between, of how we deal with the tension, how we
Right.
deal with the friction in our lives.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a personality thing.
Okay.
But I've noticed some similarities in confrontation generationally as well. What I've noticed
Similarities between the two?
different. Sorry, so
Okay.
I've noticed the way and maybe this is just because I'm a millennial and so I'm focusing more on millennial and Gen Z.
Mm-hmm.
What I really notice we do a very good job of is one, we often don't handle confrontation very well. But that's, I think, just a personality thing.
Because
I think that's across the board.
Because if you look at what's happening in all the boomers right now, they're not handling confrontation very well either.
Right. Here's what I think is the difference in generations, though. I see my generation running a lot from confrontation personally. Knowing you, and I know you don't like confrontation.
I hate confrontation.
But from a life standpoint, if something scared you or your generation, you kind of just hit it head on. And maybe I'm wrong on that. Not from a person-to-person standpoint. But like, okay, then answer this.
Okay.
If you had a career choice or change growing up or whatnot, would you or your peers have let fear stop you from doing something?
Oh, no.
No. And see, I see that being a huge thing for my generation. And that's the confrontation I'm talking about, is not so much when it comes to relational or personality stuff.
That's
I'm talking about
interesting.
more of like, we allow fear so often to dictate our choices. I didn't see that. I don't see that too much from you.
That's
guys.
interesting, because you brought up the career thing. I mean, how many
Right.
careers have I had?
Right.
Yeah,
I mean, you how many houses have you
Exactly.
moved
That's
to?
another
Different
story in
ones.
itself.
Yeah,
We're not gonna
cars
talk about
that you've changed and stuff.
But I thrive on change.
Right. But I would argue that I think your generation
I think our
does.
generation does, and I
Yes.
think again, I think we do adapt to certain situations very well.
Right. I mean, and I think part of it was because your generation grew up with so much uncertainty. It really from anywhere, you weren't this old, but anywhere from the 30s, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, that 40-year span of just kind of so much uncertainty with our country, with our world, with so many different wars, with the economics and stuff, that it really was kind of a take what you get, and you've got to just kind of roll with it.
If you don't, you're going to get run over.
Right. My generation is so much you get to decide your future, and that creates so much fear.
And it's interesting you say, because I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with like seniors going into college, and they're
Right.
scared to death to make a decision on a college. Like, if I
Yeah.
make the wrong one, what's going to happen?
Right. Relationships are the same way. What if I'm dating the wrong person? And there's some truth to wanting to analyze that situation, but I
There's
think
a healthy part of that,
Yes.
and there's an unhealthy
and then
part
there's
of
the
that.
dwelling part of it.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so Michaela says it's really easy to numb the friction within myself, turn to something else to distract. And I think that hits on what I'm saying, Michaela, perfectly. That's what our generation does, is we numb that friction that we're experiencing when we're trying to make decisions, and then, as she said at the end, we turn to something else to distract. I see your generation do a great job of facing those frictions head on, and then rather than finding distractions. Not in every case,
Yeah.
because I think there's personality struggles.
The personality, because when I read this,
That are for everybody.
You unpacked that very well. Because when I read this, I thought, I think it's more of a personality thing, but I understand what you're saying now about the generational thing. Because
Right.
I think you're right, and I'm trying to figure out why that is, what the difference is, and I keep going back to there's more information. I think the consequences are higher now.
Consequences are higher, but then I also
go ahead.
I was going to say at the same time, I think grace is also higher now.
Yeah.
And so you're not pushed as hard to choose something. Like, what I mean by that is you're given 15 choices rather than the 2.
Success has also changed.
Right.
I mean,
Oh, yeah.
it's a different world than what it was even back.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I look at like when I graduated high school, just a long time ago. 77, okay? and now, I mean, you're starting to think in middle school, where am I going to college?
Right.
It wasn't even a conversation.
Sure.
Back then.
Sure.
I mean, it wasn't until we got into high school, and I took all college prep courses and all the yada 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 yada. But I would say, my guess is, and I could be totally wrong with this, but my guess is that 60% of the people in my graduating class went to college
Okay.
at most.
Okay.
I may be off, but
It-
just as I recollect, because I didn't go.
Do you think that's high or low?
I think that's low compared to now.
Okay, that's what I was going to say. I wanted to make sure we were on the same page, because when I heard that, I was like, wow, I feel like when I was in high school,
You were going to go to college.
80%
You were going to meet
80%.
nobody if you didn't go to college.
Yeah, that's
now
what
there
was
was
funny.
some of that back then.
Okay.
Because I was actually dating someone fairly seriously at that point, and parents did not approve of me because I was not going to college. I was going to start a
Really?
business.
Okay.
And
Interesting. And
and
that's such an interesting flipping dynamic.
it is. And now, I mean, it is. I mean, I can remember with all my kids. I'm thinking, yeah, you're going to college.
That's what my parents did. That my parents even took it a step further, where they really wanted to push us to go to a Christian college,
See,
a private school.
Oh, yeah.
So ours wasn't just going to college and
Well,
pushing us.
that
to.
was actually would
Ours
have been
was
my
also the
preference
private.
also, but we didn't push that to a certain degree.
Mm-hmm.
But I think I lost train of thought. I think it's starting to flip back the other way
It is
a
Yes.
little bit, and I think
Yes.
that's healthy.
Yes, I agree, because
That's a
once
whole
again,
other
I think-
discussion.
yeah,
But
yeah.
with trades and things like that, I think if we don't, I think a lot of kids are going to be in trouble if
Right.
not.
Yeah.
They're going to graduate from college with $200,000 worth of debt
because the
and-
debt just keeps increasing.
and have a
school
job
prices.
that's going to pay them $25,000 a year.
Exactly, and that's the
So,
tension. and
anyway, that was a little rant on my
little
part right
rant.
there.
Yes. One of the other areas that I see when it comes to relationships, the friction in relationships and stuff that I see my generation does a great job of and a terrible job of, is my generation, and I was terrible at this, is very bad at handling the friction within our own relationships, but is so good, and by good I mean like able to point out and this might just be humanity in general, able to point out the friction in other people's relationships. Like, when a marriage is struggling, when your friend's marriage is struggling, you can see it.
Right.
But then for some reason, it's like a blinder when it comes to us.
Yeah.
Until it gets really bad, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's almost like we are more comfortable being advocates for other people's friction than ourselves.
And you think about friction in relationships, again, you're talking about generations. My generation is one of the first ones that really, divorce became the thing. It was still looked down upon quite a bit, but we basically started that whole thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It was more acceptable. More and more people got, then it was 50% of marriages were going to fail.
Right, right.
And then your generation swung the pendulum,
Yep.
and now we're not even going to get married.
Exactly. And I think that's part of that's part of my struggle too, is not getting married the value of intimacy has gone down so much.
Yeah.
And so it's once again part of what we're talking about throughout this series within friction. Something she was talking me through some of what she's going to be teaching on, hashtag ruining it for her, is this idea that friction isn't always bad.
We always have to live with tension.
Right.
There's always tension.
Yeah. And you grow a lot in that friction.
And what you need, yes, now that's great.
Right.
That's good stuff. And you have to learn to manage that tension.
Exactly.
You know, it's not
Managing the
about,
tension.
because what we want to do, what I want to do particularly because I'm a non-confrontation guy, is I want to get rid of tension.
Right.
I want to, let's just try to do everything we can and you're never in families and in relationships, in marriage,
Finances.
you are never going to get rid of the tension. The only thing you can do is manage it and try to get yourself healthy through it.
Exactly.
And that's why, even this Sunday, this is not one of those wow sermons that I'm going to do. But I think there's some practical things that we can take some next steps in. How do we manage friction in our families?
Right, because to that point, even to your point of saying, I'm not sure if there's going to be any wow moments for you personally. Maybe there will be for each series. If you come to any one of these weeks and you're like, none of this hit me. Again, to the point that we just said, it's so much easier for us to point out the friction in others that it creates a blind spot for our own.
Right.
So if you're feeling like, I don't struggle with finances, I feel like, well, then how can you take it to the next step? Like maybe you're too comfortable in your area, and that's why you don't see any why you are blinded in that friction.
Especially if you can think of right now, oh yeah, I know a lot of other people that have friction.
Exactly.
Then you can say, okay,
let me look at the log in my own eye.
Exactly.
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm gonna share the idea, and then I'll have you share the closing quote. We're gonna flip this on the script because something you just shared was, in the midst of that tension, an unhealthy response.
Right.
And here's the idea that I would love to share with you is I think that the devil and the enemy thrives from our unhealthy responses towards the friction that we are experiencing.
Mm-hmm.
And so when we experience that friction, that tension, whether it be not just the 4 areas we're talking about for this series, but really in any of the areas of your life, when you respond in an unhealthy way, that's when the renemy thrives. And here's an example of this. I was reading a book called Paid in Full by Rick Renner. It was the book I was telling you about the Passion of Jesus and kind of just the leading up to it was basically a Passion Week video or book. He was talking through when the devil entered Judas, okay? There's a brief moment. It actually happens right after Judas gets frustrated with Jesus because Jesus allows the woman to pour the expensive bottle of perfume.
Right.
And he was saying that the Greek word that's used there is suddenly, quickly, injects himself into Judas very fiercely, like instantaneously. And that's how fast the enemy moves. In that friction that we might be experiencing, in that tension, if we aren't truly guarding our hearts in a healthy way,
you're opening the door.
Yeah, and the devil thrives on that stuff.
Now we got everybody freaked out.
Right. Now we're like, oh gosh, what's going on? Craig says we leave relationships at the first sign of friction, searching for that perfect other person who doesn't exist.
Exactly.
That will preach, brother.
And
That's so good.
And there's an underlying truth to any of this. And, and so, when you're struggling with friction and you're thinking about giving up or what have you, you got to go back to truth, and we obviously believe truth is in the Scripture,
right?
And truth is how God wants us to live,
right?
And having somebody that can speak that kind of truth into your life, because as you said, they can't see it.
So
how many
good.
relationships do you know of that are in trouble? That even when you speak truth, they don't want to listen to it.
So true.
And
so many, the majority of it. Yeah, because of the blinders.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or not just the blinders, but then also it's so much easier to allow the friction to take place rather than confronting it.
Right.
Because and that goes not just with unhealthy friction, but it's so much easier to just scrape off the onions off the cheeseburger rather than bringing it back up and asking for a new cheeseburger.
Oh, he always brings that up.
I know, I do.
Seriously.
But it's so much easier, but it's not always healthier because maybe onions make you bloated.
Yeah, there you go. I'm going to close with this quote.
Yeah, you close
is that
with
right?
it. Yep, you close with it.
The world is wide, and I will not waste my life in friction when it can be turned into momentum. Francis E. Willard.
Yeah.
I love that. I will not waste my life in friction.
Yep.
And
dwelling in the friction.
Dwelling in the friction. Let's use whatever it is to propel us in momentum into the way forward.
Yeah, because we believe that if you master if you are able to master the friction in these 4 areas, the family, finances, relationships, ourselves, those 4 areas that we're going to be walking through, if you can master it rather than dwelling in it, and you can find momentum and thrive, man, kingdom of God is going to expand.
Exactly.
It's going to be powerful.
Well, we hope you'll join us.
Yeah. So, hey, thank you so much for joining us tonight. For Generationally Speaking, this was a fun group. A lot of great conversation that came out of this.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed this. And so
we didn't know what we were going to talk about.
we had no idea. We had the outline, but we weren't sure what we were going to share. And so this Sunday, we hope that you join us. Next week, or 2 weeks.
2 weeks.
We're playing a game. And we want you to choose the game.
Yeah, I can't remember what they're called.
Okay, so I will
wish I
send
would've
out an
known that.
email.
I wish I would have known that.
Known what?
I wish I would.
You were the one that suggested
That's
it.
the game.
Oh.
I should have known that.
Okay.
I should have known it.
And-
The game is I should have known that. We're going to get this right yet.
Yes.
I should have known that.
Or things
I didn't
learn in school. Okay, so those are the 2 games. I'm going to send out an all-church email for you to vote on which game we're going to play in 2 weeks for the 4th Thursday of the month. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great rest of your evening. Hope we see you on Sunday.
Can't wait.
Adios.
See ya.